ASMR is probably a little bit more than a trend. I think it's the way that I describe it is as a community, a culture, and a creative field. And those three things are very much interlinked. They are part, they describe something that is about the fabric of what it means to be a person in society today. And I think that the last 10 years, we've seen ASMR become less taboo. We've seen it become more part of people's lives, but still largely unspoken about. But we're seeing it saturate the internet. And it is a child of the internet, first and foremost. But it's much older than that, right? ASMR is something that's almost primeval. It's about softness. It's about slowness. It goes back to, I think, all of our childhoods. And often when you speak to people that feel ASMR to one degree or another, they often have a childhood memory that comes to mind when they think about that focus or those triggers that create something that we now call, based on the term that Jennifer Allen coined, an autonomous sensory meridian response, which I'm convinced means absolutely nothing, but signifies and symbolizes something much deeper and much more profound. The Arkdes, where I work, which is the Swedish Museum of Architecture and Design, where the exhibition first opened in 2020, and the Design Museum, both share something, which is understanding that the internet is a territory for design. And that's quite an ambiguous thing to start to describe. And, to be able to lift something that exists in its sort of packaged format purely on our screens is a fairly provocative move, to lift that into public space. And so that's where the role of the exhibition becomes extremely interesting. I, for one, do not believe that we go to exhibitions to look at objects or to read texts. We go there first and foremost because they're a social experience. We go there to look at other people. We go there for conversations. We might want to have a contextual framework to start exploring an idea. And I think that the worst exhibitions are the ones that try to tell you from the top down exactly what you should think about something that's on a wall or on a plinth. So, this exhibition does something very, very different. This exhibition synthesizes a whole series of skill sets from the work of ITA, architects who are based in Riga, who designed the scenography and the stage for the exhibition, all the way to the graphic identity by Agastag and Alex Serda. All of these start to work in unison to create an environment that ultimately has some parallel to what you might understand an exhibition is. It's showing you things. There are things to be teased apart, where mostly audiovisual works, but then you end up in two kinds of spaces. One that we call the ASMR Arena, which is a 0.9 kilometers worth of sausage pillow oval space with hanging TV chandeliers and silicon hands that deliver you a handphone that is super comfortable. I'm convinced that there's a whole world of furniture products based on this concept that I hope you to explore one day. But that environment is unique because we talk a lot about dwell time in exhibitions, how long somebody spends in a museum on average. And in most exhibitions, that is a very, very short amount of time, an unusually short amount of time. And we all know that. We've all gone to exhibitions and we've skimmed through and looked at something, we leave and it's probably been about half an hour. But this exhibition has a dwell time much, much higher. We're waiting to see what it will be at the Design Museum. But at Arkdes, there were cases where people were in the exhibition for 4 hours. Having multiple kinds of experiences. That's a conversation. They might leave and come back again. The works in there, the works on display, some of them are 2 hours long in their own right. So all of these little moments are actually challenging, I think, what we imagine an exhibition to be, what we imagine a museum to be as well, which is, I believe, fundamentally a social space. Culture is at its core social. So there's that kind of overarching concept, right, is that we're bringing in a whole series of different disciplines to try to think about how we can lift something from the screen and into public space and make it a communal experience that's centered around a feeling, right? That's sort of a fairly ambiguous feeling. The second part to your question relates to the idea about artistry, design, and let's say a grassroots movement on the internet. There are, I think, many people within the culture, creative field of ASMR that describe themselves as ASM artists. That's not an artist. That's something else completely. And when I first started to work on this exhibition in 2018, reaching out to ASM artists who might have a certain following on YouTube or Twitch, they thought it was a spam email from me. They were like, why do you want me? And why is there an exhibition on this? I don't believe you. There were so many people that didn't respond or responded skeptically. And it took a long time, like six months or so, to sort of talk to people, convince them to even get in touch is often tricky. So I would make a very big difference between ASM artist and artist, but there are some artists in the exhibition. Julie Rose Bauer has created, I think, one of the first IRL immersive soundscapes, where you can actually go and see through her lens how, like interactively, how ASMR is a practice of close listening, of close feeling, how it connects to existing disciplines, such as Foley art, for example, but how it is ultimately all about material culture. Like, what do designers do if they're not deeply embedded in the world of material culture, understanding how a certain metal or a certain piece of wood bends? What ASM artists are doing are looking at objects around them and seeing a cup, for example, not as something that holds a coffee, but as something that makes a particular sound. Thirdly, ASMR starts to interact with all of these existing fields of design. And the most important one, I think, is the design of technology. I think none of us really, I'm going to put a prop here, none of us really think about how bizarre this device is, right? Or even the trackpad on our laptops, and they are super strange. To be interacting with a kind of infinite world of information entertainment through a frictionless glass surface is probably one of the most inhumane kind of actions, and we just assume it now as this is our window into that world. But we see that within that we see a whole series of issues start to come up. One is critically about speed. What every piece of technology is designed to do is accelerate our experience of the world. And what ASMR is doing is acknowledging that there are platforms like YouTube that are all about speed, that we have the chips in a smartphone are getting quicker every year. And within all of this kind of monumental acceleration, ASMR subverts it. It carves out a space for slowness, for gentleness, for sweetness in many cases. There's a kind of generosity and a kindness and a positivity to the culture and community of ASMR that you don't see in many other internet communities. But that also begs the question about where technology is going. Because if ASMR is a product of this need, of this loss, of this oversight, then there's works, for example, by Mark Tessier in the exhibition, such as the skin on phone devices, where he made basically a phone case modeled on his own skin that mirrors the tactility and the texture of his skin. And he considers, well, what if you have a phone case where actually you're stroking to scroll on Instagram, but you're stroking skin? You can also pinch that, it can have hair follicles coming out of it. Bizarre piece, but that's also interactive in the exhibition. But all of these objects that sort of surround this kind of core world of ASMR show us that ASMR is not this thing that exists in isolation. And design is not anything that ever exists in isolation. It's always interconnected. And what design ultimately is to me is a site of imagination. And for me, ASMR is that without a doubt. And I think that at the end of the day, what I think we're touching upon here also is an exhibition or a field of inquiry that is very much connected to the body. To have an exhibition that starts to explore questions of a feeling is kind of like fodder for the alt-right, no? I'm completely astonished at the term snowflake, for example, which I find it immensely derogatory. We are squishy beings moving through a world that's full of sharp objects. And I think that what ASMR allows us to do is acknowledge that we are sensory beings, and that this is a field of design that sort of mediates between mind and body. And I think that we're at a point now where we can start to acknowledge that the brain and the body, or the mind and the body, are the same thing. They're not disconnected, and there's like endless histories of philosophical thought that tries to sort of distinguish these two things. But no, we're one being, we're one sensory being, and I think that what ASMR does is start to help us understand that in a context. I think when we first started the project, I realized fairly early on that there were not many precedents for this, that we were going to have to just trial and error it a little bit. And this is the second iteration of the exhibition. It only exists because the first iteration worked. But that was the kind of really walking into the unknown a little bit. And there were a few challenges around that. One is, can you have an individual experience in a public setting? Can you take it out from the bedroom, per se, and bring it into a public space? I still don't know the answer to that fully, but yes, some people can, and some people prefer it. You know, there is that kind of public engagement that taking it, like it's about expanding a certain experience of solitude. But in order to do that, you need to create a space of vulnerability. And museums are not spaces of vulnerability. They may be spaces of safety to some people, to people who understand the kind of codified behaviors that you're expected to engage with in a museum. Don't run, don't touch things, don't eat, don't shout. Not everybody has those inbuilt experiences. So to create a space of vulnerability in basically what is a building that basically has a monumental power dynamic towards you, that was the second challenge. And that requires a lot of detailed thought. So in the exhibition, when you receive a booklet as you enter the exhibition, because there are no texts really in the exhibition, all the texts are on the booklet, and that's because I really don't believe that you should feel compelled to stand continually and read a text from an unknown person on a wall that's telling you what to think, especially in an exhibition that's about an individual sensory experience. But that information is there if you want to dive into it. In that booklet is a participant guide. And these participant guides are based on the kinds of release forms that you might sign if you're going into a queer club, which is that you will not take photos, you will not be racist, you will not be homophobic, and I've come across these so many times, and I find them interesting little contracts that at least you understand that everybody's read it and everybody knows the kind of deal. And I kind of like the idea of having that in the context of an exhibition. So the exhibition, the participant guide tries to explain how the exhibition is constructed, what ASMR is, and asks you to be respectful of each other. And that's sort of that's an expected thing in society, but we all know that it's not often adhered to. So that participant guide is one thing. Secondly, the spatial arrangement, the kind of concert of environments in the room, I think start to indicate that this is a different kind of space. It's a soft space. It's something like a creche, or it's intestinal or brain-like. It's a space where it's inviting you. I mean, one portion of the exhibition is basically an enormous sofa, right, or daybed. It's inviting you to spend some time there. And often we just need time in a room to feel comfortable, to sort of map out the space and map out who's in there. We have hosts in the space who are there to answer questions. But then there's also architectural devices that are there to sort of indicate that this is something new. For example, you take your shoes off, or you're invited to take your shoes off when you walk into the arena, this carpeted space. And we take our shoes off when we walk into our homes or someone else's home, into a sort of safe and private environment. So there are these devices that are at play that try to all together create an environment where you may be able to dispel some of those insecurities that museums tend to force on you a little bit, and get yourself in a context where you can potentially feel something or be open to feeling something, because not everybody feels something when they watch a work of ASMR. Yeah, I mean, most exhibitions of this scale will have around 500 objects in. This exhibition has 50. So with it, already there's a kind of highly curated selection of objects, that try to sort of pinpoint possible different problems. This is not an exhibition that tells you what ASMR is in its total breadth. There's an exhibition that points towards different questions that I think ASMR tries to raise. But that kind of sensory overload question is a very tricky one to sort of navigate. I think that the spaciousness of the room, but also the kind of, this comes down to an architectural question, I think, ultimately, again, that opportunity for time is one way to help mitigate that. I think that there is nothing worse than being overloaded in a gallery environment. We've all been to exhibitions, I think, that try to, well, I think that quantity is more interesting than quality. But I think that we tried to sort of get into a situation where, there are 100,000 works of ASMR on the internet, and this is the start of your journey. You can come and understand why this might be important, but you might see something that might take you down a rabbit hole on YouTube later that day, and that's what it should be. That's fine. So navigating that question of how you bring internet culture into an institutional environment, and of course that's often not a good thing. Institutionalizing is very close to legitimizing, and I think that there are a lot of people who see this exhibition within the culture as something that is legitimizing the culture for the first time. And we have the works by Jennifer Allen, which is this kind of record of the first Wikipedia article. That was super important in 2010, 2011 for that burgeoning community to have a Wikipedia article. And the Wikipedia article was taken down, and then it was put up again. And there's this whole sort of journey of legitimization that they went through. To have it in two national museums is a whole other level of legitimization. But then we foray into the world of institutionalization, where we start to actually get into a tricky situation. And that's really about definition. And I mean, I have defined ASMR in this exhibition. That took me months to come up with that definition, because as soon as you define something, you destroy it. But at the same time, you have to balance that with the need to help someone who might walk into the room who's never heard of this before and needs a bit of convincing and needs a bit of understanding. Need to help them understand what they're looking at and why it might be important. So an exhibition like this is always sort of on that fence, right? Trying to sort of navigate too little sensory, too much sensory, too little definition, too much definition. And that's the tightrope that we walked. I am very interested as a result to hear what people think. That's the ultimate way of understanding what could be done better and what works. ASMR is not a recognized thing, scientifically speaking, right? And that's why we're in this interesting moment where we don't know really what it is. It's sort of defining itself more and more, or constantly going through this process of definition and redefinition. But there are people around the world, such as Julia Puerio with the University of Essex, who are really trying to understand psychologically and physiologically what is going on, what is happening in the brain. And that's led to a consortium of individuals across different academic institutions called ASMRnet. And we invited them to create a trigger survey in the exhibition, which is anonymized data based on a series of videos, in which you can basically describe what you're feeling. And that is important. Basically, the exhibition represents an important opportunity for these people to start to sort of get a little bit of data about what's actually going on. But it's not the be all and end all. Julia and ASMRnet are running many different studies at different levels, and this is one of them that are trying to understand, is something happening? Can we eventually get to a point? Because there are many people around the world who believe that there is a future for ASMR that is within a clinical context. That, for example, if people are using ASMR to deal with social anxiety, to self-medicate on loneliness or isolation, insomnia, then perhaps there's a space where in the future, a doctor's toolbox might include therapy, pharmaceuticals, and ASMR. And that might be something that can work for people, that can help alleviate certain problems that they're going through. So I wouldn't necessarily call it like an active data collection, but more as a sort of opportunity to feed into this sort of burgeoning and very ambiguous field of scientific study around ASMR. Many ASMR artists make ASMR because they feel it when they do it themselves. So I think that, again, it's all anecdotal, but there is something about, I mean, what ASMR is ultimately trying to do through sound is replicate touch. And I think that that's where this question of the design of technology becomes interesting again. I mean, I have these headphones on right now. I mean, headphones are quite interesting because we put them inside our bodies, and there's not much technology. Most technology we have is externalized at the moment. It's going to change, I'm sure. But if you have headphones that are deep inside your ear canal and you hear someone whisper, that is almost like a form of touch on your eardrum. And that's very intimate. And I think that ASMR as a movement really play on that, right? Coupled with movement, but critically coupled with what I would describe as intangible triggers. And I think that we've talked a lot about tangible triggers, tapping or scratching or brushing, but intangible ones are very interesting. And Bob Ross, the TV painter, the joy of painting, he's iconic to people who know him from the TV show, and he's iconic in a different way to people who know him as a meme, guy with a perm. The episodes are interesting because although Bob Ross was operating well before the term was coined, or the sort of movement galvanized in the way that we know it has now, he was, yes, brushing and stippling and scratching and completing a canvas. These are all triggers for people, but he was also speaking with incredible positive affirmation. He was speaking softly and slowly and gently, and he represented a profound space of safety for many people. And I think that helps us understand that there are these, let's say, external sensory experiences where touch is being replicated or so on. But there's also these psychological triggers that are internal, that are dependent on who you are as a person, what you are receptive to or not. And ASMR is bridging those when it's operating at its best. That's a very good question. When you start something as an experiment and you never think it's going to work, you don't really plan that too far ahead. But for me, I think there's one more collaboration in an exhibition format. I have many ideas of where that could be. Places where ASMR is, or the movement is sort of fragmenting or branching or becoming something else. But I think that the exhibition overall stands as a testament to the fact that we can look at questions that seem a little bit ambiguous at the start. The design of the internet, things that are highly contemporary, that are happening as we speak, that are very difficult to sort of tease out and contextualize. But we need to do that. We need to stop and reflect on these things, because ASMR is not all great. ASMR is pointing at things that are not so useful for us. Parasocial relationships, digital intimacy, which I think we've all become familiar with by force through the pandemic. It's not the same as having an IRL, like a URL is not the same as an IRL experience. So I think that what contemporary design, highly contemporary design, can do is help create a space in which we can reflect a little bit on the ways in which we're living and understand where we're going. So I would hope that this exhibition allows for other people, and I hope that I can also try to take this concept further a bit and continue exploring these questions. I think we can see through Weird Sensation Feels Good that it does work. A lot changed. Yeah, it doubled in size. And we had a lot of discussions about what we call curatorial integrity. So what carries forward and what needs to change. And of course, it's a very site-specific installation. So a lot of the kind of spatiality of it needs to change. But there are more works in this exhibition than there were in the previous one. And working with the incredible team, we fixed, in my opinion, a lot of things that didn't work. So it's very rare that you make an exhibition that you get to do it again and fix it, fix the things that didn't go so well. So, it is an iterating process. And of course, in the 2 years between, so much within ASMR changed. It moves itself very quickly. as it grows. So yeah, a lot was adjusted. Let's put it that way, and that's a privileged position to be in. There are so many materials that have a terrible environmental impact, and the systemic change that needs to happen in material culture is absolutely enormous. But that material, in this case, is rented. It will be going back. It's not bought and will not be disposed of afterwards, because it's very difficult to recycle. But critically, for the experience, it always becomes this balance now of how do you balance experience and all the other needs that come into sort of the ethical responsibility around making an exhibition that's temporary. The material itself is not only comfortable, but it also has a particular sound and a particular feel. Sorry. So all of these questions were weighed in, but absolutely, it does completely hint at a core question around doing things temporarily, and I think that heads into an even broader discussion about what permanence and impermanence means. It's very difficult when you're working on let's say installation builds or exhibition concepts to do it completely ethically. To do it the way you want it to do. We tested a whole load of materials, but nothing had quite the same experience. So it's, what do you sacrifice? What do you compromise? I think we found a good compromise in this exhibition, but I agree completely. If we were to do it again, then we need a new material in the next 2 years. If anybody has any ideas, I would happily receive them.